Everybody, it's Hawk here, and happy Halloween, everybody. And today, we're going to be talking about vampires. But a very specific kind, because vampires are a massive, massive umbrella term for creatures that basically are anything that happens to suck the life out of something else in a, usually blood, or in case of the Zhang-Shi, just general life force absorbing. And they have massive variation in appearance and weaknesses and abilities, and it's crazy. So we're going to talk about what most people from Europe and familiar with European mythology would consider the classic vampire, the Strigoi. Now, the Strigoi are from the Balkans and that particular region of Eastern Europe. And what they are is they are the restless dead, as it were. Now, there's multiple other ways to become a Strigoi, both living and dead, and it has several meanings, also including up to witches, but I'm talking about the undead ones, because the ones that become that while living are weird in their own way. But if you're familiar with Dracula, you will be familiar with a Strigoi, because Dracula basically is a Strigoi in every way that matters. There's no real difference between his abilities and his weaknesses and the classical Strigoi. Now, other than they didn't, repel Strigoi with garlic. But I'm going to get into that in a bit. So, the Strigoi are, unlike Dracula and various more romantic vampire types, exceedingly ugly. They're, generally speaking, rotted corpses. They look more like ghouls and ghasts than anything else. And that's something Warhammer Fantasy has nailed. They're bestial, they're horrific, they have big claws, they're very nasty to deal with, but they are still smart, and they're still cunning. They still have that human spark of intelligence to them. And combining all of this together, they have magical powers to turn into beasts, commune with beasts, possibly control the weather in some instances, as well as other various esoteric ones. They also have a laundry list of weaknesses to them, which is very helpful for the aspiring Strigoi hunter. Now, I'm going to simply call out any discrepancies between the Warhammer Fantasy ones and the classical myth ones, because they are very similar, but Warhammer Fantasy has vampires in their own particular rules, because it's its own setting. But in mythology, Strigoi are repelled by silver, holy things, garlic, and they can't trust running water. This is where that comes from. The sunlight doesn't actually cause them to burst into flame and explode or anything. What it does is simply weaken them, similar to Dracula. But that's not always explicitly called out. But they do go into their coffin during the day. That's something they do. They're also fully capable of walking amongst the normal populace, which means they have the magical ability to disguise their rotted corpseness. Because otherwise they look like Olaf from Nosferatu. So in Warhammer Fantasy battles, the only real distinction here is that the sunlight is significantly nastier to them, as in it will probably kill most of them, and they're not repelled by garlic. The holy stuff, the silver, and the stake to the heart will kill them because it's something going into their heart, not because it's a wooden stake. A sword doing that will probably work, though you may want to stab a little more, just to be sure. But when one faces a Strigoi, what you're going to deal with is, well, again, classic vampire. They can't enter your house unless you invite them, but they'll probably trick you. They'll look like a beggar who needs help. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll do all sorts of things. But they can get, once they're in the house, you have to deal with super strength, super durability, extreme reflexes, and their magical abilities to turn into animals. Now, this of course gets turned into other settings into things more like hybridizing themselves, so turning into giant bat monsters, into werewolves, into rat men, things of that type. Which suddenly opens up a wide variety of possibilities and options for them to kill you with, which is always fun. So with all that in mind, how does one go about fighting a Strigoi? Now, when one fights a Strigoi, you're going to have to be exceedingly careful because, as I said, they're very dangerous. They're very strong, they're very durable, they're very fast, they can turn into all sorts of things. So garlic is a good one. Though, in the classic mythology, they may not be so much as repelled by it, so much as it is when you're in the coffin, you place it under their tongue. Communion wafers will also work, but that's more of it just being holy. Though garlic is probably still useful just to have. Wooden stakes are good, because their skin is hard, and spears tend not to work. They tend to break, so no long pointy sticks. Crossbows will be fine because you can just shoot them, and it's a wooden stake. Go for it. Axes for dismembering, because that is something that is directly called out as being useful. A hammer to drive the stake home, and honestly a secure room to wait out the night. Just try not to engage them in the dark because, well, that's their turf. They're at full power, they've got no issues there's no real restrictions on them, and you can't see, and you're restricted by whatever light source you brought. So, particular strategies: garlic-coated bolts, that should be fun. Holy water on everything. Blessed weaponry, if you can manage that. Go to your local church, get your holy, appropriate holy symbol. Wear that, carry it, slap it on your weapon, cover it everywhere. Look like a Warhammer priest, for God's sake. Cover yourself in holy items if at all possible. Get yourself some neck armor. That's definitely good. So, that's them. The Warhammer ones are worse. And that's why I'm going to talk about them specifically. Because garlic does not work. So that's all gone, completely. The sunlight is more of your friend in this context, but at the same time, they're also much more powerful. They're fully capable of raising large armies of the dead for you to have to engage in. And then they have access to lots more magic beyond just turning into animals. And they're also much tougher and much, much stronger and way faster. They will rip through entire squads of men like it's going out of style, and you have to somehow find a way to deal with that. Now, most settings are not going to have vampires, Strigoi-based vampires anyway, be at Warhammer Fantasy levels. They're usually a bit lower than that, and usually slightly higher than the base Mythology ones, but the base Mythology ones are bad enough, because you need to find out who the person is, who has come back as a Strigoi, find their resting place, and if they're improperly buried, which is one of the ways you can come back as a Strigoi, you then have to go find the corpse, or wherever they're resting, and then decapitate it, drive a stake through it, and then flip the whole thing upside down and point it downwards, so when they wake up, they dig down, not up. Generally. Or just burn the thing. That generally works too. Fire is always, as ever, your friend. Now, probably thinking, that's it? That's a Strigoi? Yeah. Strigoi are, interestingly, pretty much what Dracula is. Though Dracula has a few creative liberties. Because Strigoi, the living ones anyway, well, being the seventh child of the same sex, having been born with red hair, yeah, that's one of the ways to turn into it. Dying from witch's curse. Dying by after being a massive sinner. Dying unmarried. Yeah, that's a weird one, right? There's a bunch of odd ones as to why someone would come back as a Strigoi. The other one is, of course, you have it gifted upon you by Satan himself. And then your crazy sorcerer thing. So, it gets a little weird once you start going into the other things Strigoi covers. But the basic vampire one, it's pretty much what you're all familiar with. It's just not pretty. It's ugly. And horrifying. And a jerk. So everybody, remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment below if you enjoyed yourself. Keep the garlic close, and have a nice Halloween. Peace out.